Good morning, everybody, or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're at. Hey everyone, my name is Kris, this is Wizard Way, and today is the final episode of Silmarillion Saturday, where I read the Silmarillion, so you don't have to. We are on the final, not chapter, but the final subsection of the book. The final section, do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do-do. It is of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, so we're going to learn a little bit more about Sauron and Second and Third Age Middle Earth. I'm excited, but this is the final section of the book. And why is my phone going off? Okay. Text from family. It's like I have all of my notifications off, and then the one thing that happens to go through. Oh dear. At least it wasn't an emergency. Okay. So welcome everybody. Hey Lord Bunnybone, what is up? I'm doing okay. Been having some depression lately, like hard getting out of bed, but once I'm out of bed, I'm fine. It's like getting over the inertia of sleeping has been really rough lately. But other than that, I'm doing great. I've been quite productive. I'm working a couple different jobs, like trying to make ends meet, and most of it is done from home. So I have a lot of freedom with when I work and when I don't. So I've been doing okay. I've even started doing an exercise thing. If anybody is familiar with Size, I'm doing Size, which is C-I-Z-E. It's a Beachbody thing. Which, yeah, it's okay. It's okay. The choreography is really easy, but my body can't keep up the way my brain can. Not sure if anyone else has experienced that. Hey, Golden, what's up? Welcome. So, welcome back, everybody. I promise that I will continue doing these streams. I just need to figure out which book we're going to hit next. We might do one of the single standalone books. Probably not Beren and Luthien, but maybe The Children of Húrin. I really like The Children of Húrin as a story, and I think it would be really cool to cover that one in a little bit more depth, because the standalone is really well put together, in my opinion. So that would be really fun, I think, to do that. I also want to start reading Tolkien's poetry, so I'll probably start reading The Lay of Leithian from the Lays of Beleriand book, which is book 3 of the History of Middle-earth. I will probably start reading that and doing ASMR streams separately, so that will not be a Saturday thing. It'll probably be a midweek thing. I had intended on starting that this week, and just life got in the way. I also have a new crafting project. I'm doing a Lord of the Rings themed cross-stitch, and for those who are familiar with crafting things, I'm doing an 18-point cross-stitch, or 18-count Ida fabric cross-stitch, which means the squares are very, very small. There are 18 per inch. So it's like over 105,000 stitches to complete the thing. Even if I did 400 to 500 stitches every single day, it would still take me 7 to 8 months to complete it. So it's going to be quite a project. Gray, my cat, has been bugging me all morning. What, Gray? Are you coming up? Okay, you can come up. Do you want some personal attention? Come here, Gray. Yeah, here he comes. Here's the big boy. Gray, come here. Hi. Come here, Gray. Come here. I'll give you a hug. I'll give you a hug. He's like, no, that's not what I want. He's my good boy. Oh, the purr, though. The purrs. Ow. I need to trim your claws, sir. He doesn't mean to claw the heck out of me, but he does. Yeah, cross-stitching, it's a very slow burn kind of satisfaction. Like, progress that you make is only like a couple square inches at a time. It's slow. Hi, Gray. You're a good boy. Let me see if you can hear the purr. I hope you guys can hear his purr. It's really, really rumbly. Art thou satisfied? I need to rewatch Big Hero 6. I am satisfied with my care. My silly cat. No, you're still sticking around? Oh, and nudging the mic. He loves you guys. He's like, no, I'm not going where you want me to go. So, the stream is cat time. Forget reading, it's just cat time, apparently. It's hard to tell you no, Gray. Rings of Power question, absolutely. There are many theories that the broken black sword in one of the character picks is Gurthan. What do I think? I went over that in a different stream, but yes, I do. Like, that is my best guess. My best guess is totally that it's Gurthan. Now, we did get a new promotional image that shows a younger character, most likely a kid, handling Gurthan. He was named, too. I forget what the name was. Okay, are we done? Are you good? Let's go. Good boy, thank you. Good boy, Gray. Are you gonna settle down? Huh? You gonna settle down? He's so sweet. Good boy, Gray. Alright, I'm putting my elbow here so that he can't just jump back up. The things we do for the pets we love. Oh yeah, he's getting comfy. There he goes. There he goes. You're such a chonk. He's a chonky boy. I do think that that Gurthang is the Black Broken Sword. I can't think of any other. Like, why would they include specifically that on a promotional image if it had nothing to do with the actual plot? I'm one of those people that I'm just like, if it's a promotional image, it's put out there intentionally, and I don't think that they would simply put out a random broken black sword. Like, it's too out of the ordinary to not be intentional. So if it's intentional, there are only 2 black swords in the Legendarium, and one of them is Anglahel or Gurthan. And considering it is known where Turin was buried. It's like Halvan Morwen or something. It is stated in the Silm. I would have to hunt it down, but basically where he slayed Glaurung the dragon. He also falls there, and when his mother sees him, his mother and father finally reunite at his gravesite, and Morwen just sort of lays down her life, which is a video that apparently I need to make, because people don't understand that mortal men in Tolkien's universe can basically assist suicide. So, trigger warning. Assisted suicide is just the norm for Tolkien's men, mortal men. So that's men or women. This is what Aragorn does. Most of the Númenórean kings did it, where they get to a certain age where they can feel their bodies starting to decline, and when that happens, they just choose to die. They just choose. But people can do that in times of great physical distress or great grief as well. So it's not actually dying of grief, it's choosing to die because of grief, right? It's still a choice. It's not like, oh, I'm so sad. It doesn't happen accidentally when you're sad. It's a choice that they have made. Hey, Isabella, what's up? My cat's name is Gray. Gray, just like the color. Gray. Named after Dorian Gray. From Oscar Wilde. Picture of Dorian Gray, a portrait of Dorian Gray. Great book. Oscar Wilde was brilliant. He was also imprisoned for gross indecency. So it'd be nice if we could move past the ew, LGBTQ people are If we could move past that, that would be great. It's getting really old, considering when was he convicted? Like, I think it was like 1898 or some shit. Like, it's like turn of the century, right at the turn of the century, he was convicted and did like hard labor for gross indecency because his lover Bosie turned him in. What a dick. Okay, back to Numenorians choosing to perish. Decline how far? Like old person or ancient person? Reminds you of broken heart syndrome. Okay, so it's not super clear. I could look up the annals of Middle Earth and double check what years each king became king. Does that make sense? When a king is born versus when they take their reign, and then when they pass the reign on to the next person. Because typically the Numenorian kings, like I said, they tend to just choose at a certain age to die. As time went on and men started getting influenced by Sauron in the Second Age, they started getting greedy with life. Not just greedy, I want all the riches everywhere, which was also definitely a thing, but they got greedy and held on to life longer than they should have. So we end up with an older population of Numenor that refuses to die willingly. They refuse to die when it's normally their time, socially accepted time to die. And they hold on because they want to keep their power, they want to keep their possessions, and they have this hope that something will happen that allows them the immortality that is allotted to the elves. Despite everyone telling them, no, that's not your gift, we can't do that. Like, even if the Valar wanted to, we couldn't do that. But they hold out this hope that they're somehow going to change into immortals, and they want to be alive when that happens so that they can cling to life. So they do this, and we end up with an older generation in charge of Numenor that is slowly going senile, but they refuse to let go, and give the reign to younger people that are in their prime. Sound familiar? Sound familiar to modern government at all? Gee, it's not a good situation, is it? When your legislators happen to be way older than the general population. It's okay. We'll get there eventually, but for legal purposes, I must say this is not a call to action against any specific person. Or anyone, honestly. I'm totally pacifistic. But that's what happens, is they reach a certain age where typically it's just socially accepted that their children are now in their prime, and therefore it's best if they give all of their power to their children. That doesn't mean that they necessarily have to die immediately at that point, but they do transfer the power and then decline to where they're comfortable and they let go. But I don't think there's an exact number for that. I'm sure it would vary from man to man. Or mortal to mortal. Let's see. Snow warning. Hi there. Looks like fan service for the promo images. They probably don't even have the rights to Gorthang or anything about Turin. That's probably true. That's an excellent point, really. They only have the rights to the appendices and the Hobbit. So the appendices, it's a good chunk of information, but it's very vague information. There's not a lot of detail put into the appendices. So would they be able to include something that is in the Silmarillion exclusively, or in the extended History of Middle-earth series of books exclusively? No, they don't have the rights to it. So they could do something that's vaguely reminiscent of Anglahel/Gurthang. I think they could probably get away with it if they don't name the sword. It could be a nod to fans that, hey, we did our research and we know this thing is a thing from the first age. But at that point, the knowledge of Gurthang would be diminished in the Second Age. And everyone would think that it has to be a different sword because Gurthang was buried with Turin, and they would think that it was gone forever. So it probably won't even be called Gurthang. I'd be very surprised if it is. So it might just be a nod, and they never say the name. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. That's what I'm thinking, Lord. Sad death, but it's still a good thing, like the kind of grief Niana turns into wisdom. Exactly. It's the circle of life, and it rules us all. It's very circle of life. Yeah. Very, very renewed shall be blade that was broken. The crownless again shall be king. Exactly. That's why, like, at the very least, it'll be a nod to fans, because you wouldn't put it in a promotional image, especially one that you have teased twice at this point, because we got the poster where it's zoomed in, and now we are seeing a promotional image of the kid who is holding the sword. Another character of color, fuck yeah. But, you know, you've promoted it twice. Why was this image leaked? It's because they know that everyone's really curious about the sword, and so they give us a tiny little hint to keep us interested. This is all very methodical. Like, it's not just random. Yeah, having it on screen without any importance would feel empty. I agree. I totally agree. Oh, thank you, Maisie. This is my Team Anatar shirt. Shameless plug for my merch. If you'd like my merch, I have an entire section of geeky merch on my website, elfboy.com, elf-boi.com, like Resident Elf Boy, because that me. So hi, everybody. Okay, so we've been sitting here long enough. I do need to get into the actual reading. How about that? So once again, we are reading from the 2021 version of the Quinta Silmarillion. Actually, not the Quinta Silmarillion. We're past the Quinta Silmarillion. What am I saying? So this is the Silmarillion. It has several different sections. We finished up the Quinta Silmarillion as well as the Akalabeth, which leaves us on the final section, which is of the Rings of Power and the Third Age. I do have an overhead cam, so if you're over on TikTok, please consider heading to the link in my bio to my YouTube channel, because you'll be able to see all of the illustrations, because I have an overhead cam to do that. But I can't share that over on the TikTok. So please head over to my YouTube if you are able. I appreciate that. That's where I need the minutes watched anyway. So I'm going to show you guys a really quick illustration that we have on the title page, and then we'll get started. How about that? Alright. There it is. So every section of the actual book has its own little illustration here. So here's the Valaquinta. I'll zoom in a little bit. There we go. So Valaquinta, really pretty. The Quintessilm has Luthien dancing. Rosie Cotton dancing. Except it's Luthien Tenuviel, and she's the most beautiful creature to have ever walked the earth, according to Tolkien. Modeled after his wife. Aww. Okay, and we had the Akalabeth. There's the Akalabeth. With the ships of the Númenóreans. Very nice. And finally... Here we go. The Rings of Power in the Third Age. So that is Barad-dûr and Orodruin in the background. Wonder how much Elvish with English subtitles that's really going to appear in the show. Probably a good amount, honestly. A fair amount. Because we do have several scenes that were teased in the actual trailer that were all the characters being elves in the same place. It would be very odd to me for them to have elves, like, if it's nothing but elves on the screen, they should be speaking Elvish to each other. If they're not, I'm going to be really upset with them. I'm going to be really upset with them if they didn't at least put forth that effort. Like, this show has a bonkers huge budget. They can afford to pay a linguist and a couple dialect coaches to keep the elves speaking Elvish, damn it. So I will actually be really disappointed if they don't manage to do that. But I think they will. I don't think that's going to be an issue. Again, there's so much money tossed into this series, it would be odd for them not to. Alright. So we'll get started on the reading. Let's switch things back over. There we go. I'm still working on those transitions, guys. It's been a long week. I haven't even touched them, but I will make sure that things smooth out a bit. Smooth out. Númenórean weapons. Yeah, Narsil and Aranruth. Yeah. I agree. The weaponry is going to be cool. We've already seen some hints of that, and I'm just like, hell yeah. Definitely eager for more of that, for sure. For show. There we go. Okay, let's get started, shall we? Hi, Kali! Welcome! We're about to get started reading. Oof. If I could just get comfortable. $1,700 chair and I can't get comfortable. What the heck? I have a Herman Miller chair. It's great for my back, but I don't sit like a normal human because, I don't know, maybe I'm somewhere on the spectrum. I never sit normally, and I fidget a lot. Oh no, difficult connection. It shouldn't be. On my end, my connection looks good. I could be wrong though. It happens. Sorry if you're having a difficult connection though. If you get past my 30s, yeah. I'm older than I look. I have charisma, but the numbers are getting steadily higher. Okay, let's get started. Kali, if you are over exclusively on my TikTok, I definitely recommend you go to the link in my bio to my YouTube channel. You'll be able to see all of the illustrations, and I do voice effects on my voice and stuff like that. So if you want a fuller, happier experience watching me read the Silmarillion, definitely head over there. It's going to be a lot more fun through the YouTube channel. Self-promotion done. What are you looking at? I need, like, X-Files theme. Do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, bing. What's my cat looking at? Hi. Hi. Look at those pretty eyes. Look at him staring at me, though. Can you stream me in Discord? I've never had anyone try? In Discord? You mean like me join a call in Discord? Because probably not, because I'm using my phone for other stuff. I don't know. Gray, are we really going to do this again? You just want some attention? You're so needy today. He's a needy boy. How am I supposed to read? He's like, you're not supposed to read. You're just supposed to love on me instead. You know, most days you ignore me. You ignore me, Gray. The moment I go live streaming, he's like, love me. Love me now. My name is, no, my sign is, no, my number is, no, you need to let it go. Nope. Nope. Okay. Well, my hand is stuck here now, because Gray won't let it go. Okay. Are we good? Are we good, sir? Stay put, please. He's like, how dare you, human? Oh. Yeah, I don't know how to set that up, so not this time. I'll try and set that up with you for the next stream that I do, Callie. Because the next one that I do is probably going to be an ASMR stream, and I'm probably going to be reading Tolkien's poetry. So that's going to be a very different vibe from today, but I plan on doing that soon. So maybe I can try things out a bit. Because the ASMR streams I don't do simultaneously on TikTok, so I will have my phone free and I should be able to put myself through on Discord. That should probably work. I don't mind simul streaming, but it's always in an effort to get people over to my YouTube channel because that's where I need the minutes watched. I still need to get my numbers high enough to turn on AdSense again. Oh, no problem. Yeah, permission to share, absolutely. Absolutely, feel free. If you have the ability to share me over on your Discord, I'm perfectly fine with that. I am absolutely fine with that. Okay, let's get started, though. Now that we're, 30 minutes in. And there's cat fur all over my mic. That was you, Gray. He's like, don't look at me. Oh my gosh. I should just edit just nothing but reactions of my cat this whole time. Look at the glares. Silly boy. Okay. Let's get started, shall we? How many pages do we have? Okay, it's 24 total, but there are a few different illustrations, so it's actually fewer pages than that. But let's get started. Hey, Larson, welcome. Just in time. We're about to start reading. Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age, in which these tales come to their end, is the subtitle. Of old there was Sauron the Maya, whom the Sindar and Beleriand named Gorthaur. In the beginning of Arda, Melkor seduced him to his allegiance, and he became the greatest and most trusted of the servants of the enemy, and the most perilous, for he could assume many forms, and for long, if he willed, he could still appear noble and beautiful, so as to deceive all but the most wary. Sexy Sauron. Hashtag simping for Sauron. When Thangorodrim was broken and Morgoth overthrown, Sauron put on his fair hue again and did obeisance to Eonwe, the herald of Manwë, and abjured all his evil deeds. And some hold that this was not at first falsely done, but that Sauron in truth repented, if only out of fear, being dismayed by the fall of Morgoth and the great wrath of the Lords of the West. But it was not within the power of Eonwe to pardon those of his own order, meaning the Maiar. And he commanded Sauron to return to Aman and there receive the judgment of Manwë. Then Sauron was ashamed, and he was unwilling to return in humiliation and to receive from the Valar a sentence, it might be, of long servitude in proof of his good faith, for under Morgoth his power had been great. Therefore, when Eonwë departed, he hid himself in Middle-earth, and he fell back into evil. For the bonds that Morgoth had laid upon him were very strong. That tells you a lot about his character there, honestly. So, we love Sauron. Hashtag Team Anatar. We'll get to him. Let's continue. In the great battle and the tumults of the fall of Thangorodrim, there were mighty convulsions in the earth, and Beleriand was broken and laid waste, and northward and westward many lands sank beneath the waters of the great sea. In the east, in Osiriand, the walls of Ered Luin were broken, and a great gap was made in them towards the south, and a gulf of the sea flowed in. Into that gulf the river Lune fell by a new course, and it was called therefore the Gulf of Lune. That country had of old been named Lindon by the Noldor, and this name it bore thereafter, and many of the Eldar still dwelt there, lingering, unwilling yet to forsake Beleriand, where they had fought and labored long. Gil-galad, son of Fingon, was their king, and with him was Elrond half-elven, son of Eärendil the Mariner, and brother of Elros, the first king of Númenor. Upon the shores of the Gulf of Lune, the elves built their havens, and named them Mithlond, and there they held many ships. Oh, pardon me. Right back to the right page. Score. All right, they named it Mithlond, and there they held many ships, for the harborage was good. From the grey havens, the Eldar ever and anon set sail, fleeing from the darkness of the days of earth. For by the mercy of the Valar, the firstborn could still follow the straight road. Brain fart. The straight road, and return, if they would, to their kindred in Eressëa and Valinor beyond the encircling seas. Others of the Eldar there were who crossed the mountains of Ered Luin in that age and passed into the inner lands. Many of these were Teleri, survivors of Doriath and Osiriand, and they established realms among the Sylvan elves in woods and mountains far from the sea, for which nonetheless they ever yearned in their hearts. Only in Eregion, which men called Hollin, did elves of Noldorin race establish a lasting realm beyond the Ered Luin. Eregion was nigh to the great mansions of the dwarves that were named Khazad-dûm, but by the elves of Hadodrond, and afterwards Moria. So the name of Khazad-dûm is Hadodrond. It's a bit of a tongue twister. Hadodrond. Hadodrond. And later on, it's renamed Moria. But that happens later. From Ost-in-Edhil, the city of the elves, the high road ran to the west gate of Khazad-dûm, for a friendship arose between dwarves and elves, such as has never elsewhere been, to the enrichment of both those peoples. In the Eregion, the craftsmen of the Gwaithimyrdain, the people of the jewelsmiths, surpassed in cunning all that have ever wrought, save only Feanor himself, and indeed greatest in skill among them was Celebrimbor, son of Curufin, who was estranged from his father and remained in Nargothrond when Celegorm and Curufin were driven forth, as is told in the Quintus Silmarillion. Basically, when they tried to usurp the throne, when Finrod left to help Beren and Luthien, that's Finrod Felagund, the one who actually established Nargothrond. When he left to help Beren and Luthien, he left his brother Orodreth on the throne, And the sons of Feanor, Celegorm and Curufin, were both like, this guy would be easy to overthrow. We have a following here. And they did think to completely overthrow the government and take control of Nargothrond. However, when they went abroad, they saw Luthien, and they captured Luthien and tried to, like, rape her, and it's all bad. It's all bad stuff. But their plot was uncovered, they were punished, and basically exiled out of Nargothrond. So at that time, Celebrimbor, Curufin's son, stayed behind, estranged from his father. He's like, dude, dick move. Absolutely not. Absolutely not okay. Which is refreshing. That's kind of refreshing to see from a Feanorian. Dude, too far. You've gone too far. And honestly, of all the sons of Feanor, Curufin and Celegorm are like the two that they do that the most often. They take it too far. Okay, shifting. Oh, because I'm sitting on my legs, and I shouldn't, but I do anyway. So Celebrimbor is a great smith. We have now established this. Elsewhere in Middle-earth, there was a peace for many years, yet the lands were for the most part savage and desolate, save only where the people of Beleriand came. Many elves dwelt there indeed, as they had dwelt through the countless years, wandering free in the wide lands far from the sea. But they were Avari, to whom the deeds of Beleriand were but a rumor, and Valinor only a distant name. And in the south and in the further east men multiplied, and most of them turned to evil, for Sauron was at work. Seeing the desolation of the world, Sauron said in his heart that the Valar, having overthrown Morgoth, had again forgotten Middle-earth, and his pride grew apace. He looked with hatred on the Eldar, and he feared the men of Numenor, who came back at whiles in their ships to the shores of Middle-earth. But for long he dissembled his mind and concealed the dark designs that he shaped in his heart. Men he found the easiest to sway of all the peoples of Middle-earth, but long he sought to persuade the elves to his service, for he knew that the firstborn had the greater power. And he went far and wide among them, and his hue was still that of one both fair and wise. Only in Lindon did he not come, for Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming, and though they knew not who in truth he was, they would not admit to him that. Oh my gosh, they would not admit him to that land. I apologize for all my fumbles today. Let's try that sentence again, shall we? For Gil-galad and Elrond doubted him and his fair seeming, and though they knew not in truth who he was, they would not admit him to that land. But elsewhere the elves received him gladly, and a few among them hearkened to the messengers from Lindon, bidding them beware. For Sauron took to himself the name of Anatar, the Lord of Gifts, and they had at first much profit from his friendship. And he said to them, Alas, for the weakness of the great! For a mighty king is Gil-galad, and wise in all lore is Master Elrond, and yet they will not aid me in my labors. Can it be that they do not desire to see the other lands become as blissful as their own? But wherefore should Middle-earth remain forever desolate and dark, whereas the elves could make it as fair as Eressëa, nay, even as Valinor? And since you have not returned thither as you might, I perceive that you love this Middle-earth, as do I. Is it not then our task to labor together for its enrichment, and for the raising of all the elven kindreds that wander here untaught to the height of that power and knowledge which those have who are beyond the sea? It was in Eregion that the counsels of Sauron were most gladly received, for in that land the Noldor desired ever to increase the skill and subtlety of their works. Moreover, they were not at peace in their hearts, since they had refused to return into the West, and they desired both to stay in Middle-earth, which indeed they loved, and yet to enjoy the bliss of those that had departed. Therefore they hearkened to Sauron, and they learned of him many things, for his knowledge was great. In those days the smiths of Ostin Edil surpassed all that they had contrived before, and they took thought, and they made rings of power. But Sauron guided their labors, and he was aware of all that they did, for his desire was to set a bond upon the elves and to bring them under his vigilance. That's kind of an important note to make. Like, the whole point of the Rings of Power was for Sauron to be able to keep tabs on everyone. Not necessarily to bring them under his direct influence, perchance, but at the very least to know where they were and keep his thought present amongst them. Yes, he did indeed name himself Lord of Gifts. That is what Anatar means. So, from the verb anna, A-N-N-A, which is to gift, and atar, which is king or lord. So it is literally Lord of Gifts. So Anatar. It's kind of it's a bit on the head, isn't it? Like someone should have thought, okay, there's a Maya walking around, and he's kind of haughty, and he wants to teach us a bunch of stuff, but like he's named himself Lord of Gifts. Maybe this could be a bad idea? And Elrond and Gil-galad are like, this is definitely a bad idea. Let's not listen to this guy. But unfortunately, Celebrimbor wants to become great, and he does become great. It just comes at a price. So the Rings of Power were forged originally. Right, I'm gonna gift them rings, so Lord of Gifts. Exactly. Sauron is very good at the long con. The long con is total, like, deception is his forte. It's Santa? Oh, gosh. That's it. So every Christmas from now on, we are going to celebrate the return of Anatar, the giver of gifts. I'm like, this is perfect. That's given the background of Christianity usurping the holiday from the pagans, like, this is a great way of taking it back. All hail the Lord of Darkness. Oh, Lord. That's great. I'm totally going to use that. So if I put up a Christmas tree this year, it's going to be Sauron themed. I'll put the eye at the top. That tracks. Headcanon accepted. Alright, so he made the rings to put the elves under his vigilance, right? Let's continue. Now the elves made many rings, but secretly Sauron made one ring to rule all the others, and their power was bound up with it, to be subject wholly to it, and to the last only so long as it too should last. And much of the strength and will of Sauron passed into that one ring. For the power of the elven rings was very great, and that which should govern them must be a thing of surpassing potency, and Sauron forged it in the mountain of fire in the land of shadow, which is Orodruin, and the land of shadow is Mordor. That's what those two names mean. Mountain of fire in the land of shadow. And while he wore the one ring, he could perceive all the things that were done by means of the lesser rings, and he could see and govern the very thoughts of those that wore them. So I take back what I said. It was completely to subjugate the minds of the ring bearers. Someone please make a drawing of Sauron in a red suit. If I had any skill at actually drawing, I would totally try to do that. Okay, but the elves were not so lightly to be caught. As soon as Sauron set the one ring upon his finger, they were aware of him, and they knew him and perceived that he would be master of them and of all that they had wrought. Then in anger and fear they took off their rings, but he, finding that he was betrayed and that the elves were not deceived, was filled with wrath, and he came against them with open war, demanding that all the rings should be delivered to him, since the elven smiths could not have attained their making without his lore and counsel. But the elves fled from him, and 3 of their rings they saved, and bore them away and hid them. Now these were the 3 that had last been made, and they possessed the greatest powers. Narya, Nenya, and Velia they were named, the rings of fire and of water and of air, set with ruby and adamant and sapphire. And of all the elven rings Sauron most desired to possess them, for those who had them in their keeping could ward off the decays of time and postpone the weariness of the world. But Sauron could not discover them, for they were given into the hands of the wise, wise with a capital W, who concealed them and never again used them openly while Sauron kept the ruling ring. Therefore the 3 remained unsullied, for they were forged by Celebrimbor alone, and the hand of Sauron had never touched them, yet they also were subject to the One. It's like, even though Sauron didn't forge the 3 with his own hands, they were, like it just said, forged by Celebrimbor alone, there's still spell work in place that connects them to the One Ring. So it's like, if Sauron watched their making, if he sat there and watched Celebrimbor forge them, he could infuse that making with his own spell work, even if he himself never touched them. His presence alone connects the rings to the One Ring. Or perhaps even a technique that he taught Celebrimbor for the forging of these rings. I'm thinking like a backdoor in computer programming. So if he taught Celebrimbor, okay, so here's how you lay the spells, here's how you enhance the rings, in that teaching he could have snuck in a technique that would allow him to metaphysically interfere and lay his own spells without Celebrimbor knowing. So, kind of like a hacker leaving, the programmer left a back door, and then the hacker takes advantage of it, right? Same concept, except magic. Magic! Okay. Getting comfy. Don't mind me. Okay. From that time, war never ceased between Sauron and the elves, and Eregion was laid waste, and Celebrimbor slain, and the doors of Moria were shut. In that time, the stronghold and refuge of Imladris, that men called Rivendell, was founded by Elrond Half-Elven, and long it endured. But Sauron gathered into his hands all the remaining rings of power, and he dealt them out to the other peoples of Middle-earth, hoping thus to bring under his sway all those that desired secret power beyond the measure of their kind. 7 rings he gave to the dwarves, but to men he gave 9, for men proved in this matter, as in others, the readiest to his will. And all those rings that he governed he perverted, the more easily since he had a part in their making, and they were accursed, and they betrayed in the end all those that used them. The dwarves indeed proved tough and hard to tame. They ill endure the domination of others, and the thoughts of their hearts are hard to fathom, nor can they be turned to shadows. They used their rings only for the getting of wealth, but wrath and overmastering greed of gold were kindled in their hearts, of which evil enough after came to the prophet of Sauron. It is said that the foundation of each of the 7 hordes of the dwarf kings of old was a golden ring. But all those hordes long ago were plundered, and the dragons devoured them, and of the 7 rings some were consumed in fire, and some Sauron recovered. Men proved easier to ensnare. Those who used the 9 rings became mighty in their day, kings, sorcerers, and warriors of old. They obtained glory and great wealth, yet it turned to their undoing. They had, as it seemed, unending life, yet life became unendurable to them. They could walk, if they would, unseen by all eyes in this world beneath the sun, and they could see things in worlds invisible to mortal men. But too often they beheld only the phantoms and delusions of Sauron. And one by one, sooner or later, according to their native strength, and to the good or evil of their wills in the beginning, they fell under the thraldom of the ring that they bore, and under the domination of the one, which was Sauron's. And they became forever invisible, save to him that wore the ruling ring, and they entered into the realm of shadows. The Nazgul were they, the ring wraiths, the enemy's most terrible servants. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. What a great description of bad guys. So cool. It's an interesting thing to note that basically the bodies of these kings of men, the bodies of the men who wore the 9, slowly became invisible to everybody except Sauron or the one wearing the ring. Which is why when, in the movie, when Frodo puts the ring on his finger, he gets transported into what they called the Wraith Realm, which is like another dimension, if you will. But the way that they visualize that in Peter Jackson's films is you can only see the black armor and the cloaks. You can never actually see the form of any of the ring wraiths because there's nothing there. There's nothing there to see. But when Frodo puts on the ring, everything is inverted into light, and through that they can see, these old, decrepit, sort of ghastly bodies. So only the person wearing the one ring can actually see the ring wraiths, and that's how they chose to depict them in Peter Jackson's adaptation. They may or may not actually look like that, but that was his interpretation, which I thought was pretty well done. Picturing Sauron as a nagging boss, always watching over Celebrimbor's shoulder when making the rings. Yeah, probably. And if your brain goes the queer route, like mine does, obviously, me being queer, there was something more between Celebrimbor and Anatar, if you ask me. There are just too many little details in there that hint toward, much like it is openly said that Sauron was seduced by Melkor, that he was seduced by Morgoth back in the day. I think that he brought that same energy to Celebrimbor. So I think there was an actual seduction happening. Be that in the physical sense or in the emotional, intellectual, and spiritual sense. I think that Sauron is very good at worming his way into the minds of his enemies and connecting there. He does that later with the Númenóreans as well, which we read last week. How he goes from being a prisoner, where he gave himself up to the Númenóreans and was like, "Oh, clap me in irons. Oh no. I'll defer to your judgment, you powerful people." He willfully gives himself up and becomes a prisoner of Númenor. And within 3 years or some crazy shit like that, he becomes the head vizier. He becomes the head counsel of the king and turns him and most of the Númenóreans to a dark cult worshipping Melkor. Like, the guy is brilliant, okay? Like, Sauron is brilliant, which is why we end up simping for Sauron. This is an amazing bad guy. And there is depth there. So, being deprived of Melkor, I think Sauron, same character. I think Sauron would be looking to find a partner, because he was partnered with Melkor for time uncounted. Because, you know, he was seduced to Morgoth's side back when Almaren was still a thing. And that's an island when there were two lamps, right? when there were two lamps rather than two trees. That's when Sauron was brought over to the dark side. So that's before we even started counting time in the lengths provided by the two trees of Valinor. So this is a long time ago. So Sauron was partnered for a very long time, being Melkor / Morgoth's second in command, right? His number one. So being bereft of Melkor in the Second Age, after the War of Wrath, I think Sauron would be looking for a partner in crime. Not consciously, but I think subconsciously. He'd be like, it'd be really cool to not be the only person scheming and doing all of these evil things. Like, I can do it by myself, but it'd be a lot more fun with a friend. So I think that his intent with Celebrimbor was to seduce him to the dark side. And especially because of the way that there was lingering hate between the Feanorians and Morgoth and Sauron, I think that it would have been like such a sweet, sweet, tasty victory for Sauron to seduce one of Feanor's line into his service. Like, who could resist the temptation of even trying? Like, Sauron would be all over that. So I think just logically it makes sense for him to really try to win Celebrimbor over. And in my head, that also means a physical seduction, but that's my own personal headcanon. So the thought of him being, you know, the nagging boss always watching over Celebrimbor's shoulder, probably watching over his shoulder and doing the whole, you know, in rom-coms where someone's learning archery, right? It's typically the girl's learning archery and the boy comes behind her and like adjusts her stance, make it all close, and like they have a moment where like doki doki doki, like the heart starts pitter-pattering a little faster, right? I think that vibe, but in the Forge with Celebrimbor as Sauron. That's my head. That's my headcanon. I will never not think that. So, yes, but specifically that image of no, here's how you hit the hammer. Getting really close. And Celebrimbor flushing from more than just the forge heat, if you know what I mean. But again, I'm queer. That is my interpretation. You are free to disagree with me. But you can't tell me I'm wrong because you can't prove me wrong. All right, where were we? Okay, the ringwraiths. Darkness went with them, and they cried with the voices of death. Super descriptive. Now Sauron's lust and pride increased, until he knew no bounds, and he determined to make himself master of all things in Middle-earth, and to destroy the elves, and to compass, if he might, the downfall of Númenor. He brooked no freedom, nor any rivalry, and he named himself Lord of the Earth. This is after the fall of Celebrimbor, which also adds to my headcanon, but we'll get into that later. I've already spoken enough about that. So he wants to compass or guide the fall of Númenor. He brooked no freedom nor any rivalry, and he named himself Lord of the Earth. A mask he still could wear, so that if he wished he might deceive the eyes of men, seeming to them wise and fair. But he ruled rather by force and fear, if they might avail. And those who perceived his shadow spreading over the world called him the Dark Lord, and named him the Enemy. And he gathered again under his government all the evil things of the days of Morgoth that remained on earth or beneath it, and the orcs were at his command and multiplied like flies. Thus the black years began, which the elves call the days of flight. In that time, many of the elves of Middle-earth fled to Lindon, and thence over the seas, never to return. And many were destroyed by Sauron and his servants, but in Lindon Gil-galad still maintained his power, and Sauron dared not as yet to pass the mountains of Eredluin, nor to assail the havens. And Gil-galad was aided by the Númenóreans. Elsewhere Sauron reigned, and those who would be free took refuge in the fastness of wood and mountain, and ever fear pursued them. In the east and south well nigh all men were under his dominion. And they grew strong in those days and built many towns and walls of stone. And they were numerous and fierce in war and armed with iron. To them Sauron was both king and god, and they feared him exceedingly, for he surrounded his abode with fire. Okay, before I continue, I want to show off one of the illustrations that we passed. So I'm going to switch that over. Oh my goodness. Sorry about the itching of my nose. It's still really bad pollen out here, and I'm actually having allergies for the first time in my life. Okay. So it's a little bit difficult to see because my camera isn't the highest quality, but again, all illustrations are by Ted Nasmith in this version of the Silmarillion. And this is another one that I had not seen before. But this is in the chasms of Orodruin, which is the Fire Mountain, the Mountain of Flame. And you can see if we zoom in a little bit, there is Sauron, forging the One Ring. So that is the fiery chasm from whence it came. Right. That's kind of cool. You can see the stairway coming down and then over. His own personal forge. So I thought that was a cool illustration that we would share. Alright, let's continue. And I'm going to shift again. Oh yes, you see that too. The boss role can be interpreted in many ways. I agree. And I don't begrudge anyone from being like, I don't think they were lovers. That's fine. You don't have to. I'm not saying you have to. I'm saying it makes sense. But, you know, do I think that Tolkien wrote it with that intention? Absolutely not. Unless Tolkien was closeted. Which, you know, sure, maybe, whatever. He did have a wife and children, so he wouldn't have been completely straight. Or he wouldn't have been completely queer. But, some flavor of bisexual. I don't choose to dwell on that because it's all just speculation. Speculation on real people is not something that I'm keen on, honestly. Could he have been closeted and some flavor of queer, or at least queer sympathetic? Absolutely. We have no way of knowing. And is that something that he would have even shared with his family, given the time period that Tolkien lived and grew up in? Because I mentioned Oscar Wilde being tried and convicted of gross indecency for being gay. Like, when you grow up with that kind of an example for what happens if you're open about your sexuality, like, that would keep a lot of people in the closet. So, could he have been? He could have, but there's no proof either way. So I think that despite his intention to include or not include that kind of element in the story between Anatar and Celebrimbor, I think it's still a valid interpretation given what we are actually given. Celebrimbor sensing something pushing against his backside when Sauron's showing him the right way of doing things. Yeah, Is that your hammer, or are you just glad to see me? The hammer is my penis. Crossover, sorry. Sorry, not sorry. Let's continue with the book. We got a lot to go. Okay, so men fear Sauron because he surrounds his abode with fire. Yet there came at length a stay in the onslaught of Sauron upon the Westlands, for, as is told in the Akallabeth, he was challenged by the might of Numenor. So great was the power and splendor of the Númenóreans in the noontide of their realm that the servants of Sauron would not withstand them, and hoping to accomplish by cunning what he could not achieve by force, he left Middle-earth for a while and went to Númenor as a hostage of Tar Calion, the king. And there he abode, until at last by his craft he had corrupted the hearts of most of that people, and set them at war with the Valar, and so compassed their ruin, as he had long desired. But that ruin was more terrible than Sauron had foreseen, and he had forgotten the might of the lords of the West in their anger. The world was broken, and the land was swallowed up, and the seas rose over it, and Sauron himself went down into the abyss. But his spirit arose and fled back on a dark wind to Middle-earth, seeking a home. There he found that the power of Gil-galad had grown great in the years of his absence, and it was spread now over wide regions of the north and west, and had passed beyond the misty mountains and the great river, even to the borders of Greenwood the Great, and was drawing nigh to the strong places where once he had dwelt secure. Then Sauron withdrew to his fortress in the Black Land and meditated war. So basically, during the time that Sauron is away in Númenor, compassing, as they say, the ruin of that realm, Gil-galad is able to regain much of what was lost in Eregion. So the influence of the king grows. The influence of King Gil-galad grows exponentially in this time period, and he ends up being, an influence even beyond the Misty Mountains, beyond the Hithaeglir. So that includes Lothlorien and Greenwood the Great, which means that despite Oropher being the ruler of Greenwood the Great at this point, and him not being overly fond of the Noldor in any way, shape, or form, this is when they start being like, okay, there's obviously evil that's growing here, and not having a ring of power, Oropher would be even more acutely aware of the darkness that's surrounding Greenwood. So he finally allies himself with Gil-galad. And that's kind of a big deal. Like, he doesn't like the guy, but they're finally like, okay, let's fight together, because we can definitely do more good with more people. Let's join forces. Hey, I'm doing all right. Welcome. We are covering the last portion of the Silmarillion today. This is Of the Rings of Power in the Third Age. So we're getting into the Celebrimbor and Sauron and all that good stuff. All the stuff leading up to The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. So during the time when Sauron is away, seducing the Númenóreans to the dark side and having them worship Melkor in a dark cult, like we read last week, Gil-galad has regained most of Eregion, and the elves are actually starting to band together, which is dangerous for Sauron. So he goes back to the Black Land, which is Mordor, and meditates war. In that time, those of the Númenóreans who were saved from the destruction fled eastward, as is told in the Akalabeth. The chief of these were Elendil the Tall, and his sons Isildur and Anarion. Kinsmen of the king they were, descendants of Elros, but they had been unwilling to listen to Sauron, and had refused to make war on the lords of the west. Manning their ships with all who remained faithful, they forsook the land of Númenor ere ruin came upon it. They were mighty men, and their ships were strong and tall. But the tempest overtook them, and they were borne aloft on hills of water even to the clouds, and they descended upon Middle-earth like birds of the storm. Basically, a huge tidal wave comes from the destruction of Númenor, because a huge chasm is opened, and the entire island falls into that chasm, along with Sauron. He loses a form, but he goes back to Mordor. Elendil was cast up by the waves in the land of Lindon, and he was befriended by Gil-galad. Thence he passed up the river Llyn, and beyond Ered Luin he established his realm, and his people dwelt in many places in Eriador, about the courses of the Llyn and the Baranduin. But his chief city was Anúminas, beside the water of Lake Nenuyal. At Fornost upon the North Downs also the Númenóreans dwelt, and in Cardolan and the hills of Rhudaur. And towers they raised upon Emen Bereid and upon Amon Sul. Amon Sul it's the watchtower of Amon Sul. We see that, it's Weathertop in Lord of the Rings. So these are hills in the northern area of Eriador, where the Númenóreans made their dwellings. Okay, towers they raised upon Emen Bereid and upon Amon Sul. Just a note here, Amon means hill, and Emen is the plural of Amon. So Amon becomes Emen, hills, plural. So Emen Bereid and Amon Sul. And there remain many barrows and ruined works in those places, but the towers of Emen Bereid still look towards the sea. Isildur and Anarion were borne away southwards, and at the last they brought their ships upon the great river Anduin that flows out of Rovanion into the western sea in the bay of Belfalas. And they established a realm in those lands that were after called Gondor, whereas the northern kingdom was named Arnor. Long before, in the days of their power, the mariners of Númenor had established a haven and strong places about the mouths of Anduin, in despite of Sauron in the Black Land that lay nigh upon the east. In the latter days, to this haven came only the faithful of Númenor, and many, therefore, of the folk of the coastlands in that region were in whole or in part akin to the elf friends and the people of Elendil, and they welcomed his sons. The chief city of this southern realm was Osgiliath, through the midst of which the great river flowed. So the river flows right through the middle of Osgiliath. We see that in the movies as well. And the Númenóreans built there a great bridge, upon which there were towers and houses of stone wonderful to behold, and tall ships came up out of the sea to the quays of the city. Other strong places they built also upon either hand. Minas Ithil, the tower of the rising moon, eastward upon the shoulder of the mountains of shadow as a threat to Mordor, and to the westward Minas Anor, the tower of the setting sun, at the feet of the Mount Mindoluin, as a shield against the wild men of the dales. In Minas Ithil was the house of Isildur, and this makes perfect sense because Isil and Ithil are basically roots of the same word, which is moon. So, Anarion, he has Anur, or the sun, in his name, so his tower is Minas Anur, tower of the setting sun. And Isildur has Ithil in his name, or Isil, which is moon, so his tower is Minas Ithil, the Tower of the Rising Moon. Rising moon, setting sun. But these two towers were named after them. Where was I? Okay. I was talking about Minas Anor being a shield against the wild men of the Dales. In Minas Ithil was the house of Isildur, and in Minas Anor the house of Anarion. But they shared the realm between them, and their thrones were set side by side in the great hall of Osgiliath. These were the chief dwellings of the Númenóreans in Gondor. But other works marvelous and strong they built in the land in those days of their power. At the Argonath, at Aglarond, and at Erech. And in the circle of Angrenost, Angrenost, which men called Isengard or Isengard, they made the pinnacle of Orthanc of unbreakable stone. So Orthanc was made by the Númenóreans. That's a fun detail. It may have been the dwelling of Saruman, but it was forged originally by the Númenóreans. Many treasures and great heirlooms of virtue and wonder the exiles had brought from Númenor. And of these the most renowned were the 7 stones and the white tree. The white tree was grown from the fruit of Nimloth the Fair, that stood in the courts of the king of Armenelos in Númenor, ere Sauron burned it. Because that was in the Akallabeth. Sauron burns down the white tree of Númenor, and the name of that tree is Nimloth, which means white flower. But he burns down Nimloth and, uses the fires to sacrifice people, to Morgul. He didn't have to go that hard, but he does, and we almost appreciate him for the audacity. It's so epic. It's terrible, but it's epic. So this is a seedling from that white tree that Sauron burned. And an image of the eldest of trees, white Telperion, which Yavanna caused to grow in the land of the Valar. The tree, memorial of the Eldar and of the light of Valinor, was planted in Minas Ithil before the house of Isildur, since he it was that had saved the fruit from destruction, but the stones were divided. 3 Elendil took, and his sons each 2. So there are 7 total. Elendil took 3 to the north into Arnor, and then Isildur and Anarion each took 2. And those are both in Gondor. Those of Elendil were set in towers upon Emenberid and upon Amunsul, and in the city of Anúminas. But those of his sons were at Minas Ithil and Minas Anor, and at Orthanc and in Osgiliath. So we now have the location of all 7 stones. Currently. It doesn't stay known, but currently we've got Anúminas, which is the main city of the kingdom of Arnor, and then we have Emenberid and Amunsul. Amunsul is Weathertop. So we actually had one of the 7 seeing stones there originally, before it was destroyed. And then we have Minas Anor, Minas Ithil, so the 2 dwellings of the sons of Elendil, and then Orthanc, where Saruman ends up being, and Osgiliath. So that's where we have all 7 seeing stones. Or the Palantir. Okay. Now these stones had this virtue, that those who looked therein might perceive in them things far off, whether in place or in time. For the most part, they revealed only things near to another kindred stone, for the stones each called to each. But those who possessed great strength of will and of mind might learn to direct their gaze whither they would. Thus the Númenóreans were aware of many things that their enemies wished to conceal, and little escaped their vigilance in the days of their might. So you gotta think, that's a lot of telescopes, basically, that they've got. And it is said that the towers of Emenberid were not built indeed by the exiles of Númenor, but were raised by Gil-galad for Elendil, his friend, and the Seeing Stone of Emenberid was set in Elostirion, the tallest of the towers. Elostirion. Thither Elendil would repair, and thence he would gaze out over the sundering seas, when the yearning of exile was upon him, and it is believed that thus he would at whiles see afar away even the tower of Avalone upon Eressëa, where the Master Stone abode, and yet abides. These stones were gifts of the Eldar to Amandil, father of Elendil, for the comfort of the faithful of Númenor in their dark days, when the elves might come no longer to the land under the shadow of Sauron, and they were called the Palantiri, those that watch from afar. But all those that were brought to Middle-earth long ago were lost. All right, so we have a bit of a pause here. I'm going to take a drink of water. Making pretty good progress. It's going to be a bit of a longer stream today, just because I keep getting distracted. All right. I'm doing all right. Sorry if I didn't see this, Polaris, but welcome. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And thank you for tuning in. Yeah, one of the few times it's almost good of a man to have the audacity. Good lord. That's definitely one thing Sauron has in spades, is audacity. I would say Anatar is king of audacity. Anatar the Audacious. I'll have to make merch at some point. The Audacity. Just Anatar. The Audacity. I really hope Anatar comes up. Anatar is not directly mentioned by name in the appendices, so, like, I don't know if they're going to be able to include him. I really hope they do. But for legal purposes, I'm not sure if the Amazon TV series can include Anatar. I'm hoping they do. Gosh. And if they do, I will absolutely make Anatar the Audacity. Sure, it's the Audacity for me. Oh gosh, who would I have playing Anatar if I could choose the actor? I have no idea. I have no idea. I'm open to suggestion. That's the thing. I have difficulty making a firm picture in my mind. It's something I've never really been good at. The Lord of the Audacious Gifts, basically. But I have difficulty getting a firm picture in my head of what I think Anatar would look like. Part of me wants him to be blonde, just because, I don't know, there's a certain golden hue. He's all about appearing fair and light. Like, he would want to, in my mind, he would want to contrast the darkness of his soul by surrounding himself in a form that seems to be woven of pure light, right? So I think he would be either golden or silver-haired, though I think it would skew more towards gold. So golden-haired, skin tone, like a medium skin tone, so you could absolutely convince me to cast him someone who is of Spanish-speaking descent, so, like, you know, any Latinx person that is hot could have a chance. And I know that's a very, very broad net I'm casting, but you could absolutely convince me that he's not white. I would love that. I would love for Sauron as Anatar to have some frickin' melanin. He has to be hot. That's really the only thing. Like, I always saw him as having golden hair in his Anatar form, but his original Myron form, his actual form that he first took when he took a physical form to imitate the Eldar, I think his original physical form is redhead with freckles. I like thinking of Sauron as being this deceptively small-framed Maya with red hair and freckles, lots of freckles, because you just don't see freckled characters anywhere, and for such a long time freckles were deemed not pretty. Like, now it's a trend. Now people are getting tattooed freckles, and I'm just like, remember when freckles were like, they would get you ostracized? I have a lot of freckles on my arms, not so much on my face. It's my Irish heritage pushing through. I'm fuzzy and freckled on my arms. But I also have a skin condition, which doesn't help. But no, I always saw Myron as being red-haired. And I think originally his eyes would have been like a golden hue, and then when he goes dark, when he becomes Sauron, I think they slowly become that ringed and evil flame kind of thing, and then you end up with the Eye of Sauron. Oscar Isaac with silver hair. Let me look him up. I have no idea who you're talking about, so I'm gonna have to look him up. Terrible with names, but forgive me, people who are watching this live stream. We're gonna take a quick look at something completely unrelated. Alright. You said Oscar Isaac. Oh, okay. Yeah, I didn't know his name, but I know who you're talking about. Oscar Isaac Hernandez Estrada. I didn't know he was an American actor. Ah, he went to Juilliard too. That's kind of cool. So you're talking about, oh gosh, what's the character? I don't even remember the character's name. The character's name that he plays in Star Wars. It's not Finn. He's not Finn. Finn is the black character. I forget his name. It's fine. Whatever. But no, he could definitely, absolutely. He's got great bone structure. Like, that's really all I'm looking for, is could the person be considered sexy, and do they have good bone structure? Because sharp features, I think, would be another way I would describe Anatar. But no, absolutely, give some freaking melanin to Sauron. I would love that. He is a gorgeous human being, Oscar Isaac, though. Like, wow. Gorgeous, gorgeous man. Poe, thank you. Yes, his name was Poe in Star Wars. Thank you. I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, so forgive me. Block. Bye. But yes, his name was definitely Poe. So yeah, totally. Someone like that. I don't know about him with blonde hair though. That would be a bit odd. But I mean, he's supposed to look otherworldly, so who knows? And also the way that they are interpreting elves in the new series is not the same way that Peter Jackson did. Peter Jackson went very androgynous. He pushed the androgyny super hard, which I adored, but the newer interpretation, the adaptation that the creators of the Rings of Power are taking, is less androgynous in that way. with the long hair and everything. So we're having plenty of elves with shorter hair. I would assume as much. We've seen Arondir. We've seen Arondir so far, and I believe he's of mixed heritage, the actor, but oh my goodness, he has much more short, buzzed, styled hair, which I think works just fine. He has bone structure that could absolutely pull off a long hair wig, but no one is obligated to keep the long hair aspect of the elves that we saw in the Peter Jackson films. I like them that way, but I'm still very much open. The long hair doesn't make someone sexy. It's a perk. When I had a boyfriend, he was long-haired. His was about to hear. It was great. It was fun being able to play with his hair. I'm like, anyways, back to what we were reading, shall we? Sorry for the tangent there. I'll edit it out. I'll edit it out later. Oh, he plays the Moon Knight? The Moon Knight Marvel character? I haven't watched it yet. It's one of those things that I'm not familiar with that character at all. I'm not huge into the MCU at all. So I had no idea about the character, other than when I read the description, it mentioned that they have DID, dissociative identity disorder. And I was like, I did an internal groan, only because interpretations of DID tend to be wildly exaggerated and very damaging to the community that actually has DID. But from what I've read, people have been enjoying it, and they actually have advisors, DID advisors specifically, for the show. And they should. They absolutely should. To make it at least less problematic, because we are only going to be seeing one case, which should not be indicative of all cases of DID. But because it's difficult to depict mental illness in a way that doesn't do harm to the community, that deals with it every day, I was hesitant. But now I've read some good things about the series, so I might give it a try. I'm currently watching Battlestar Galactica, and that's going to take me a bit, so give me time. I'll get to Moon Knight soon enough. But I didn't know that he was in it. That's cool. Oh, that's so cool. I didn't know you had DID. That's awesome. I mean, not awesome, but I'm like, do you know how many alters you have and stuff? I find it fascinating, but I know very little about it. I follow a lot of DID people on TikTok, but that's about it. That's really cool, though, that as someone with DID, you actually really approve. You fully approve. That's super cool. I take your guys' opinion more than anybody else's. 9. Wow. I can't even imagine. I cannot even imagine. That's absolutely fascinating. Gosh, at some point, if you and whoever is fronting wants to chat with me about it, I would love to learn more. I need to do some actual reading on it, though, instead of just expecting people to educate me, which is super privileged. But that's super cool. That's super cool, and I'd love to learn more at some point, whether it's from you or just doing my own research. But that's why I was wary about the show, and I'm not as wary, especially given that recommendation from you, giving approval. I appreciate that. I really do. I don't trust anybody else's word for it. It's like, listen to the community that's actually being represented and see what they think. Yeah, that's what I've heard as well, Larson, which is really cool. It makes me happy, and it makes me more inclined to actually watch and support the show. Alright, shall we continue, though? Let's continue. Gosh, my belly is grumbling. I apologize if you can hear that. Okay, so we were talking about the Palantiri and how all of them are eventually lost. Thus, the exiles of Numenor established their realms in Arnor and Gondor. But ere many years had passed, it became manifest that their enemy Sauron had also returned. He came in secret, as has been told, to his ancient kingdom of Mordor, beyond the Efelduath, the Mountains of Shadow. And that country marched with Gondor upon the east. There, above the valley of Gorgoroth, was built his fortress, vast and strong, Barad-dûr, the Dark Tower. And there was a fiery mountain in that land that the elves named Orodruin. Indeed, for that reason Sauron had set there his dwelling long before, for he used the fire that welled there from the heart of the earth in his sorceries and in his forging. And in the midst of the land of Mordor he had fashioned the ruling ring. There now he brooded in the dark. So emo. Until he had wrought for himself a new shape, and it was terrible, for his fair semblance had departed forever when he was cast into the abyss at the drowning of Numenor. He took up again the great ring and clothed himself in power. And the malice of the eye of Sauron few even of the great among elves and men could endure. The eye of Sauron. Now Sauron prepared war against the Eldar and the men of Westerness, which is another name for Numenor. And the fires of the mountain were wakened again. Wherefore, seeing the smoke of Orodruin from afar, and perceiving that Sauron had returned, the Númenóreans named that mountain anew Amon Amarth, which is Mount Doom. So that's how we get Mount Doom. Amon Amarth. And we've seen Amarth used previously with one of the names of the sons of Feanor was Amarth, which is Doom, basically. Originally the name was Umarth, which is like ill-fated doom. That's like a bad destiny. It's bad or ill fate. And we also saw that used with the name that Turin Turambar gave himself. It was son of Umarth, right? Son of bad fate, of ill fate. So Amon Amarth is Mount Doom. And Sauron gathered to him great strength of his servants out of the east and the south, and among them were not a few of the high race of Numenor, for in the days of the sojourn of Sauron in that land the hearts of well nigh all its people had been turned toward darkness. Therefore many of those who sailed east in that time and made fortresses and dwellings upon the coasts were already bent to his will, and they served him still gladly in Middle-earth. But because of the power of Gil-galad, these renegades, lords both mighty and evil, for the most part took up their abodes in the southlands far away. Yet two there were, Herumor and Huinur, who rose to power among the Haradrim, a great and cruel people that dwelt in the wide lands south of Mordor, beyond the mountains of Anduin, beyond the mouths of Anduin. When therefore Sauron saw his time, he came with great force against the new realm of Gondor, and he took Minas Ithil, and he destroyed the white tree of Isildur that grew there. But Isildur escaped, and taking with him a seedling of the tree, he went with his wife and his sons by ship down the river, and they sailed from the mouths of Anduin, seeking Elendil. Meanwhile, Anarion held Osgiliath against the enemy, and for that time drove him back to the mountains. But Sauron gathered his strength again, and Anarion knew that unless help should come, his kingdom would not long stand. So this is sort of a repeating of history, because Isildur was the one who snuck into the hallowed areas of Numenor and took a seedling from Nimloth, the white tree of Numenor. He's the one who took the seedling originally from that tree. He snuck in, took the seedling, and left, and he escaped the fall of Numenor. So he did that basically again. The white tree was in Minas Ithil, where he dwelled, but that gets taken by the enemy, and he manages to escape with another seedling. Okay. Now Elendil and Gil-galad took counsel together, for they perceived that Sauron would grow too strong and would overcome all his enemies one by one, if they did not unite against him. Therefore they made that league which is called the Last Alliance, and they marched east into Middle-earth, gathering a great host of elves and men. And they halted for a while at Imladris. It is said that the host that was there assembled was fairer and more splendid in arms than any that has since been seen in Middle-earth, and none greater has been mustered since the host of the Valar went against Thangorodrim. So the elves that assemble in Imladris are very well armed, and a fair folk. It's a pretty looking army. He's got a pretty force there. From Imladris they crossed the Misty Mountains by many passes and marched down the river Anduin, and so came at last upon the host of Sauron on Dagorlad, the battle plain, which lies before the gate of the Black Land. The gate is called the Morannon, which is literally Black Gate. It's Black Gate in Elvish. Morannon is Black Gate. Where was I? Ah, yes, the battle plain which lies before the land of the which lies before the gate of the Black Land. All living things were divided in that day, and some of every kind, even of beasts and birds, were found in either host, save the elves only. They alone were undivided and followed Gil-galad. Of the dwarves, few fought upon either side, but the kindred of Durin of Moria fought against Sauron. The host of Gil-galad and Elendil had the victory, for the might of the elves was still great in those days, and the Númenóreans were strong and tall and terrible in their wrath. Against Aeglos, the spear of Gil-galad, none could stand, and the sword of Elendil filled orcs and men with fear, for it shone with the light of the sun and of the moon, and it was named Narsil. Then Gil-galad and Elendil passed into Mordor and encompassed the stronghold of Sauron. Again, that's Barad-dûr. And they laid siege to it for 7 years, and suffered grievous loss by fire and by the darts and bolts of the enemy. And Sauron sent many sorties against them. There in the valley of Gorgoroth, Anarion, son of Elendil, was slain, and many others. But at the last the siege was so strait that Sauron himself came forth, and he wrestled with Gil-galad and Elendil, and they both were slain. And the sword of Elendil broke under him as he fell. But Sauron also was thrown down, and with the hilt shard of Narsil Isildur cut the ruling ring from the hand of Sauron and took it for his own. Then Sauron was for that time vanquished, and he forsook his body, and his spirit fled far away and hid in waste places. And he took no visible shape again for many long years. So that is what we saw in the prologue of the Fellowship of the Ring movie. Thus began the third age of the world, after the eldest days and the black years. And there was still hope in that time and the memory of mirth, and for long the white tree of the Eldar flowered in the courts of the kings of men, for the seedling which he had saved Isildur planted in the citadel of Anor, in memory of his brother, ere he departed from Gondor. The servants of Sauron were routed and dispersed, yet they were not wholly destroyed, and though many men turned now from evil and became subject to the heirs of Elendil, yet many more remembered Sauron in their hearts and hated the kingdoms of the west. The Dark Tower was leveled to the ground, yet its foundations remained, and it was not forgotten. The Númenóreans indeed set a guard upon the land of Mordor, but none dared to dwell there because of the terror of the memory of Sauron, and because of the mountain of fire that stood nigh to Barad-dûr, and the valley of Gorgoroth was filled with ash. Many of the elves and many of the Númenóreans and of men who were their allies had perished in the battle and the siege. And Elendil the Tall and Gil-galad the High King were such league of elves and men. Oh, shoot, I skipped a line. I'm like, that didn't make sense. And Elendil the Tall and Gil-galad the High King were no more. Never again was such a host assembled, nor was any such league of elves and men, for after Elendil's day the two kindreds became estranged. The rolling ring passed out of the knowledge even of the wise in that age, yet it was not unmade, for Isildur would not surrender it to Elrond and Círdan, who stood by. They counselled him to cast it into the fire of Orodruin nigh at hand, in which it had been forged, so that it should perish, and the power of Sauron be forever diminished. Again, diminished. I cannot stress this enough. Sauron cannot die. He cannot completely perish. This is why Tolkien's very specific with his wording, that Sauron is vanquished for a period, or that he didn't take a form for many years. He's never actually killed, because you can't kill a being of thought. So even if he takes no physical form, he still exists. So I just wanted to point that out, because it's very telling that even destroying the ring, it just would have diminished. It would have diminished Sauron's power to the point that he would be inconsequential. He wouldn't be able to have any influence over anyone directly anymore. So they want him to throw the ring into the fire. Excuse me. So that it should perish and the power of Sauron be forever diminished, and he should remain only as a shadow of malice in the wilderness. But Isildur refused this counsel, saying,
"This I will have as weregild for my father's death and my brother's. Was it not I that dealt the enemy this death blow?"
And the ring that he held seemed to him exceedingly fair to look on, and he would not suffer it to be destroyed. Taking it, therefore, he returned at first to Minas Anor, and there planted the white tree in memory of his brother Anarion. But soon he departed, and after he had given counsel to Menelil, his brother's son, who had committed to him the realm of the south, he bore away the ring, to be an heirloom of his house, and marched north from Gondor by the way that Elendil had come, and he forsook the south kingdom. For he purposed to take up his father's realm in Eriador, far from the shadow of the Black Land. But Isildur was overwhelmed by a host of orcs that lay in wait in the misty mountains, and they descended upon him at unawares in his camp between the greenwood and the great river, nigh to Loag Ningloron, the Gladden Fields. For he was heedless and set no guard, deeming that all his foes were overthrown. There well nigh all his people were slain, and among them were his 3 elder sons, Elendur, Aratan, and Cirion. But his wife and his youngest son, Valandil, he had left in Imladris when he went to the war. Isildur himself escaped by means of the ring, for when he wore it he was invisible to all eyes. But the orcs hunted him by scent and slaught, until he came to the river and plunged in. There the ring betrayed him and avenged its maker, for it slipped from his finger as he swam, and it was lost in the water. Then the orcs saw him as he labored in the stream, and they shot him with many arrows, and that was his end. Only 3 of his people came ever back over the mountains after long wandering, and of these one was Otar, his esquire, to whose keeping he had given the shards of the sword of Elendil. So the shards of Narsil were taken by his squire, who actually survived. One of only 3. Thus Narsil came in due time to the hand of Valandil, Isildur's heir in Imladris. But the blade was broken, and its light was extinguished, and it was not forged anew. Excuse me. Oh my gosh, these allergies. They're killing me. Okay, it was not forged anew. And Master Elrond foretold that this would not be done until the ruling ring should be found again and Sauron should return. But the hope of elves and men was that these things might never come to pass. Valandil took up his abode in Anuminas. But his folk were diminished, and of the Númenóreans and the men of Eriador, there remained now too few to people the land or to maintain all the places that Elendil had built. In Dagorlad and in Mordor and upon the Gladden fields many had fallen. And it came to pass after the days of Earandur, the 7th king that followed Valandil, that the men of Westerness, the Dunedain of the north, became divided into petty realms and lordships, and their foes devoured them one by one. Ever they dwindled with the years, until their glory passed, leaving only green mounds in the grass. At length, naught was left of them but a strange people wandering secretly in the wild, and other men knew not their homes nor their purpose of their journeys, and save in Imladris, in the house of Elrond, their ancestry was forgotten. Yet the shards of the sword were cherished during many lives of men by the heirs of Isildur, and their line, from father to son, remained unbroken. In the south, the realm of Gondor endured, and for a time its splendor grew, until it recalled the wealth and majesty of Númenor ere it fell. High towers the people of Gondor built, and strong places, and havens of many ships, and the winged crown of the kings of men was held in awe by people of many lands and tongues. For many a year the white tree grew before the king's house in Minas Anor, and the seed of that tree which Isildur brought out of the deeps of the sea from Númenor. Oh, sorry. I messed that up. Let's go back. For many a year the white tree grew before the king's house in Minas Anor, the seed of that tree which Isildur brought out of the deeps of the sea from Númenor, and the seed before that came from Avalon, and before that from Valinor in the day before days, when the world was young. Yet at last, in the wearing of the swift years of Middle-earth, Gondor waned, and the line of Menildil, son of Anarion, failed, for the blood of the Númenóreans became such mingled with that of other men, and their power and wisdom was diminished, and their lifespan was shortened, and the watch upon Mordor slumbered. And in the days of Telemnar, the 3rd and 20th of the line of Melendil, a plague came upon dark winds out of the east, and it smote the king and his children, and many of the people of Gondor perished. Then the forts on the borders of Mordor were deserted, and Minas Ithil was emptied of its people. And evil entered again into the Black Land secretly, and the ashes of Gorgoroth were stirred as by a cold wind, for dark shapes gathered there. It is said that these were indeed the Ulairi, whom Sauron called the Nazgul, the 9 ring-wraiths that had long remained hidden, but returned now to prepare ways for their master, for he had begun to grow again. And in the days of Eärnil, they made their first stroke, and they came by night out of Mordor over the passes of the Mountains of Shadow, and took Minas Ithil for their abode. And they made it a place of such dread that none dared to look upon it. Thereafter it was called Minas Morgul, the Tower of Sorcery, and Minas Morgul was ever at war with Minas Anor in the west. Then Osgiliath, which in the waning of the people had long been deserted, became a place of ruins and a city of ghosts. But Minas Anor endured, and it was named anew Minas Tirith, the Tower of Guard. For there the kings caused to be built the citadel of White Tower, very tall and fair, and its eye was upon many lands. Proud still and strong was that city, and in it the white tree still flowered for a while before the house of the kings. And there the remnant of the Númenóreans still defended the passage of the river against the terrors of Minas Morgul, and against all the enemies of the west, orcs and monsters and evil men, and thus the lands behind them, west of Anduin, were protected from war and destruction. Still, Minas Tirith endured after the days of Eärnur, son of Eärnil, and the last king of Gondor. He it was that rode alone to the gates of Minas Morgul to meet the challenge of the Morgul lord, and he met him in single combat, but he was betrayed by the Nazgul and taken alive into the city of torment, and no living man saw him ever again. Now Eärnur left no heir. But when the line of the kings failed, the stewards of the house of Mardil the Faithful ruled the city and its ever-shrinking realm, and the Rohirrim, the horsemen of the north, came and dwelt in the green land of Rohan, which before was named Kalinardon, which is like green land. Kalinardon, and was part of the kingdom of Gondor. And the Rohirrim aided the lords of the city in their wars, and northward beyond the falls of Rauros and the gates of Argonath, there was as yet other defenses, powers more ancient of which men knew little, against whom the things of evil did not dare to move, until in the ripening of time their dark lord Sauron should come forth again. And until that time was come, never again in the days of Eärnil did the Nazgul dare to cross the river or to come forth from their city in shape visible to men. And there's a pause there. So, also important note that the Nazgul, the Witch King of Angmar, the Witch King came forth and basically went in single combat against, at the time, the King of Gondor. And the other Nazgul betrayed him. They're like, yeah, single combat, sure, we accept your challenge. And then they betrayed him and took him into the halls, and he was never seen again. So either he was twisted to dark purpose or he was killed. Most likely he was just killed. Though it's an interesting theory that they took him and maybe destroyed the weakest of the Nazgul and made him into a new Nazgul. That would be interesting. Ba-ba-ba-bum. But they were talking a bit about the split of Gondor and Rohan. Rohan was just part of Gondor for a while, but they gave stewardship of it to the Rohirrim specifically. And so they were allies, but we see that strain develops between those two realms later on. They also mentioned that there were powers in the north that the enemy didn't move against, didn't have the power or nerve to move against. And that's Galadriel. It's Galadriel and her ring of power that is protecting Lothlorien. So it's not stated, but that's what they're talking about. All right, we're getting there. Wait, so the Haradrim in The Lord of the Rings were descendants of the evil Númenor. Yes. Now, the Haradrim, it's a combination. Now, not all of them are Númenóreans, but their blood was mingled with the Númenóreans, because the Númenóreans, back in their heyday, would come down, they would come out of the west from Númenor, and settled along the coastlands and traveled inland a ways as well. So they brought their knowledge to a lot of different areas of mortal men, and the Haradrim are the men who were living there, the normal men who were living there. But several of the Númenóreans stayed after a while. Basically, there was a shift in sort of the Númenórean policy. Númenórean foreign policy changed drastically. So we ended up with the Númenóreans going from a we're just going to teach them things to a we're going to subjugate them, take all their treasures, and lord over them because we're better. So there was a shift that happened. Before, they didn't really establish their own realms. They stayed and they taught people, but they didn't establish their own realms. They had no intention of ruling the people. They let them do that themselves. So not too many stayed originally, but once that shift happened and they started wanting to rule these areas and subjugate the people and take them as slaves, there was a mingling that happened. And so then they established actual realms so that they could keep the Haradrim under their thumb and take them as their realm. You know, establish a realm, colonize the people. That's totally what they did. So, yes. Once they established those realms, it is reasonable to assume that there was a certain mingling of the blood of Númenor with the mortal men there. But there wouldn't have been very many actual Númenóreans there. We do know from the Akallabeth that 3 of the kings that Sauron gave rings to were in fact Númenóreans. And the others were probably influenced by the Númenóreans, but easy to turn. So these realms that were made along the coastlines and a little bit inland from there by the Númenóreans probably did mingle their blood with the Haradrim. At the very least, they assume lordship over the Haradrim and consider that their realm. But yes, the kings in those areas would have at least a tiny little fraction of Númenórean blood. Mm-hmm. Which is kind of like they're descended from the same people. They're descended from the same people. But just not the line of kings from Elros. Not all Númenóreans, right? Not all Númenóreans are from the line of Elros. That would be very, very incestuous. So the line of the Númenóreans from Elros is where we get our various kings of the Númenóreans. So that's how we get Elendil, Isildur, Anarion, and then Isildur's line and Anarion's line. Anarion's line then perishes, gets captured by the Nazgul and perishes with a plague that hits. So that line of kings is gone. The only remaining line is Isildur's. And his line remains unbroken, and that over a few thousand years we end up with just the Dunedain. Just men wandering the wild in the north. Because Isildur and his line couldn't maintain a full-blown realm anymore. So many people were killed and scattered that just they couldn't maintain a realm. So we end up with small companies of men, and those are picked off by the orcs one by one, little companies. So they become a bit nomadic, and then we end up with just a scattered few Dunedain left, of which one is Aragorn. But he's fostered in Imladris. Much like Isildur's youngest son was fostered in Imladris with his mother, before taking the kingship. So, yeah. It's all connected. It's all connected. Tolkien did a good job of connecting things. Okay. Do. Gosh, my belly is so unhappy with me. I apologize. Okay. So until Sauron came back... Oh, hi, kitten. Hi, Alana. We're taking a cat break. Hi, kitten. So you guys saw Grey earlier. This is Alana. She's my dilute tortie. She is a child of Grey's. Hi, kitten bit. She just wants cuddles. Have I been live for too long? It's only been 2 hours. Are you good? Go on, kitten bit. Come on. Thank you. Good girl. Good girl, kitten. Stay there, please. I love the glares that I get from my cats. They're like, rude. What do you mean, stay? Stupid human. Alright, shall we continue? No, we shall not. Alana, move it. Kitten bit. So basically, it's talking about how the Nazgul didn't come forth and didn't cross out of Minas Morgul in any shape that was visible to men until Sauron returned. So it's not like they were wandering around. They consolidated their power and they stayed in Mordor or in Minas Morgul. In all the days of the Third Age, after the fall of Gil-galad, Master Elrond abode in Imladris, and he gathered there many elves and other folk of wisdom and power from among all the kindreds of Middle-earth. And he preserved through many lives of men the memory of all that had been fair. And the house of Elrond was a refuge for the weary and the oppressed, and a treasury of good counsel and wise lore. In that house were harbored the heirs of Isildur, in childhood and old age, because of the kinship of their blood with Elrond himself, and because he knew in his wisdom that one should come of their line to whom a great part was appointed in the last deeds of that age. And until that time came the shards of Elendil's sword. And until that time came, there should be a comma there. And until that time came, the shards of Elendil's sword were given to the keeping of Elrond, when the days of the Dunedain darkened and they became a wandering people. In Eriador, Imladris was the chief dwelling of the High Elves, but at the grey havens of Lindon there abode also a remnant of the people of Gil-galad the Elven King. At times they would wander into the lands of Eriador, but for the most part they dwelt near the shores of the sea, building and tending the elven ships wherein those of the firstborn who grew weary of the world set sail into the uttermost west. Círdan, the shipwright, was lord of the havens and mighty among the wise. Of the 3 rings that the elves had preserved, unsullied, no open word was ever spoken among the wise, and few even of the Eldar knew where they were bestowed. Yet after the fall of Sauron, their power was ever at work, and where they abode, their mirth also dwelt, and all things were unstained by the griefs of time. Therefore, ere the Third Age was ended, the elves perceived that the Ring of Sapphire was with Elrond, in the fair valley of Rivendell, upon whose house the stars of heaven most brightly shone. Which is sweet, actually. That's a fun little reference, because Elrond is the son of Eärendil, and Eärendil is set, his ship, Vingalot, is set in the sky with a Silmaril, so Eärendil is a star. It's the equivalent of Venus. It is the morning star. So saying that upon whose house the stars of heaven most brightly shone is kind of a nice little nod to Elrond's heritage there. Let me shift once again. There we go. Whereas the Ring of Adamant was in the land of Lorien, where dwelt the Lady Galadriel. A queen she was of the woodland elves, the wife of Celeborn of Doriath, yet she herself was of the Noldor, and remembered the day before the days in Valinor, and she was the mightiest and fairest of all the elves that remained in Middle-earth. But the Red Ring remained hidden until the end, and none save Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan knew to whom it had been committed. There we go. Words. Thus it was that in two domains the bliss and beauty of the elves remained still undiminished while that age endured. In Imladris and in Lothlorien, the hidden land between Celebrant and Anduin, where the trees bore flowers of gold, and no orc or evil thing dared ever come. Yet many voices were heard among the elves, foreboding that if Sauron should again come, then either he would find the ruling ring that was lost, or at the best his enemies would discover it and destroy it. But in either chance the powers of the three must then fail, and all things maintained by them must fade, and so the elves should pass into the twilight, and the dominion of men begin. And so indeed it has since befallen. The 1 and the 7 and the 9 are destroyed, and the 3 have passed away, and with them the third age is ended, and the tales of the Eldar in Middle-earth draw to their close. Just a note here, we just jumped past the entire War of the Ring. So that was, people suspected that, okay, either the ring is going to be found and Sauron will come back, or the ring will be found by his servants and destroyed in some way. And either way, it means the power of the 3 rings would diminish. And then it just jumps ahead and says, and that's exactly what happened. So the tales of the Eldar in Middle-earth draw to their close. Those were the fading years, and in them the last flowering of the elves east of the sea came to its winter. In that time the Noldor walked still in the hitherlands, mightiest and fairest of the children of the world, and their tongues were still heard by mortal ears. Many things of beauty and wonder remained on earth in that time, and many things also of evil and dread. Orcs there were, and trolls and dragons and fell beasts, and strange creatures old and wise in the woods whose names are forgotten. Dwarves still labored in halls and wrought with patient craft works of metal and stone that none now can rival. But the dominion of men was preparing, and all things were changing, until at last the Dark Lord arose in Mirkwood again. Oh, sorry, I was wrong. We didn't jump past the War of the Ring, we jumped right to the War of the Ring. Kitten bed. Move it. Go on. Move. Go on, Alana. Just putting up a fight. Give me some time, kitten bit. Okay, so the Dark Lord arose in Mirkwood again. Now of old the name of that forest was Greenwood the Great, and its wide halls and aisles were the haunt of many beasts and of birds of bright song. And there was the realm of King Thranduil under the oak and the beech. But after many years, and well nigh a third of that age of the world had passed, a darkness crept slowly through the wood from the southward, and fear walked there in shadowy glades. Fell beasts came hunting, and cruel and evil creatures laid there their snares. Important to note that the reason it is the realm of King Thranduil here is because his father, Orifer, was killed during the Battle of the Last Alliance. So this is about 1,000 years or so. I think it's 1,080 years into the Third Age. So Thranduil is king of Greenwood. I also have a t-shirt that says Team Erengalen. Erengalen is Greenwood. Okay. Okay, evil creatures laid there their snares. Then the name of the forest was changed, and Mirkwood it was called, for the nightshade lay deep there, and few dared to pass through, save only in the north where Thranduil's people still held the evil at bay. Whence it came few could tell, and it was long ere even the wise could discover it. It was the shadow of Sauron, and the sign of his return. For coming out of the wastes of the east, he took up his abode in the south of the forest, and slowly he grew and took shape there again. In a dark hill he made his dwelling, and wrought there his sorcery, and all folk feared the sorcerer of Dol Guldur. And yet they knew not at first how great was their peril. Move it. Go away, you're bothering me. Alana, move. She's like rude. I think that's the most forceful I've ever been with her on stream. I'm like, nope, redirect. Sorry about that. Even as the first shadows were felt in Mirkwood, there appeared in the west of Middle-earth the Istari, whom men called the Wizards. None knew at the time whence they were, save Círdan of the Havens, and only to Elrond and to Galadriel did he reveal that they came over the sea. But afterwards it is said among the elves that they were messengers sent by the lords of the west to contest the power of Sauron if he should arise again, and to move elves and men and all living things of good will to valiant deeds. In the likeness of men they appeared, old but vigorous, and they changed little with the years, but aged but slowly, though great cares lay on them. Great wisdom they had, and many powers of mind and hand. Long they journeyed far and wide among elves and men, and held converse also with beasts and with birds. And the peoples of Middle-earth gave to them many names, for their true names they did not reveal. Chief among them were those whom the elves called Mithrandir and Curunir, but the men in the north named Gandalf and Saruman. Of these, Curunir was the eldest and came first, and after him came Mithrandir and Radagast, and others of the Istari who went into the east of Middle-earth and do not come into these tales. Those are the blue wizards. Radagast was the friend of all beasts and birds, but Curunir went most among men, and he was subtle in speech and skilled in all the devices of smithcraft. Mithrandir was closest in council with Elrond and the elves. Pardon me. He wandered far in the north and west, and made never in any land and my goodness. He wandered far in the north and west, and made never in any land any lasting abode. But Curunir journeyed into the east, and when he returned he dwelt at Orthanc in the ring of Isengard, which the Númenóreans made in the days of their power. Ever most vigilant was Mithrandir, and he it was that most doubted the darkness in Mirkwood. For though many deemed it was wrought by the ring-wraiths, he feared that it was indeed the first shadow of Sauron returning, and he went to Dol Guldur, and the sorcerer fled from him. And there was a watchful peace for a long while. But at length the shadow returned, and its power increased, and in that time was first made the Council of the Wise, that is called the White Council. And therein were Elrond and Galadriel and Círdan and other lords of the Eldar, and with them were Mithrandir and Curunir. And Curunir, that was Saruman the White, was chosen to be their chief, for he had most studied the devices of Sauron of old. It's worth noting here that Curunir, or Saruman, was also one of the Maiar of Aule, and Sauron, Myron, but Sauron himself was also a Maya of Aule. So these two probably knew each other, like really, really long time back. But it makes perfect sense that Curanir would be the most familiar with Sauron and his devices and his persona, because they were, at the very least, fellow Maiar under Aule's direction originally. Aule being the inventor, forge god of earth. Yeah, for he had most studied the devices of Sauron of old. Galadriel indeed had wished that Mithrandir should be the head of the council, and Saruman begrudged them that, for his pride and desire of mastery was grown great. But Mithrandir refused the office, since he would have no ties and no allegiance, save to those who sent him, and he would abide in no place nor be subject to any summons. But Saruman now began to study the lore of the Rings of Power, their making and their history. Now the shadow grew ever greater, and in the hearts of Elrond and Mithrandir darkened. Therefore, on a time, Mithrandir at great peril went again to Dol Guldur and the pits of the sorcerer, and he discovered the truth of his fears and escaped. And returning to Elrond, he said,
True, alas, is our guess. This is not one of the Ulairi, as many have long supposed. It is Sauron himself who has taken shape again, and now grows apace, and he is gathering again all the rings to his hand, and he seeks ever for news of the one, and of the heirs of Isildur, if they live still on earth.
And Elrond said,
In the hour that Isildur took the ring and would not surrender it, his doom was wrought, that Sauron should return. Yet the one was lost,
said Mithrandir.
And while it still lies hid, we can master the enemy if we gather our strength and tarry not too long.
Then the White Council was summoned, and Mithrandir urged them to swift deeds, but Curanir spoke against him, and counseled them to wait yet and to watch.
For I believe not,
said he,
that the one will ever be found again in Middle-earth. Into Anduin it fell, and long ago, I deem, it was rolled to the sea. There it shall lie until the end, when all this world is broken and the deeps are removed.
Therefore naught was done at that time, though Elrond's heart misgave him, and he said to Mithrandir,
Nevertheless, I forebode that the one will yet be found, and then war will arise again, and in that war this age will be ended. Indeed, in the second darkness it will end, unless some strange chance deliver us that my eyes cannot see. Many are the strange chances of the world,
said Mithrandir,
and help oft shall come from the hands of the weak when the wise falter.
Thus the wise were troubled, but none as yet perceived that Curanir had turned to dark thoughts, and was already a traitor in heart, for he desired that he and no other should find the great ring, so that he might wield it himself and order all the world to his will. Too long he had studied the ways of Sauron in hope to defeat him, and now he envied him as a rival, rather than hated his works. And he deemed that the ring, which was Sauron's, would seek for its master as he became manifest once more. But if he were driven out again, then it would lie hid. Therefore he was willing to play with peril and let Sauron be for a time, hoping by his craft forestall both his friends and the enemy when the ring should appear. Pardon me. Hi there! Hi, where's my socks? Welcome. We are finishing up the Rings of Power in the Third Age, which is the last section of the Silmarillion. So we're talking about the White Council and how Curanir, or Saruman, has just switched sides because he spent too long studying Sauron and started to admire him as a rival rather than think him evil. Evil. Evil is his one and only name. So Saruman has now switched sides, which is no good. He set a watch upon the Gladden fields, but soon he discovered that the servants of Dol Guldur were searching all the ways of the river in that region. Then he perceived that Sauron also had learned of the manner of Isildur's end, and he grew afraid and withdrew to Isengard and fortified it. And ever he probed deeper into the lore of the Rings of Power and the art of their forging. But he spoke of none of this to the council, hoping still that he might be the first to hear news of the ring. He gathered a great host of spies, and many of these were birds, for Radagast lent him his aid, divining naught of his treachery, and deeming that this was but part of the watch upon the enemy. Poor Radagast, he didn't know any better. Poor gullible Radagast. But ever the shadow in Mirkwood grew deeper, and to Dol Guldur evil things repaired out of all the dark places of the world, and they were united again under one will, and their malice was directed against the elves and the survivors of Numenor. Therefore, at last, the council was again summoned, and the lore of the rings was much debated. But Mithrandir spoke to the council, saying,
"It is not needed that the ring should be found, for while it abides on this earth and is not unmade, still the power that it holds will live, and Sauron will grow and have hope. The might of the elves and the elf friends is less now than of old. Soon he will be too strong for you, even without the great ring, for he rules the 9, and of the 7 he has recovered 3. We must strike."
To this Curanir now assented, desiring that Sauron should be thrust from Dol Guldur, which was nigh to the river, and should have leisure to search there no longer. Therefore, for the last time, he aided the council, and they put forth their strength, and they assailed Dol Guldur, and drove Sauron from his hold, and Mirkwood, for a brief while, was made wholesome again. Gosh, poor Thranduil. You gotta think, they're going after the elves, right? The elves and the surviving Númenóreans. Well, the Númenóreans are over the mountains from Dol Guldur. The elves are right there in the same fucking forest. This is not a good time to be a wood elf. Poor Thranduil. Because Galadriel is at least protected by having Nenya. She has the Ring of Adamant. So she has one of the elven rings. Thranduil doesn't. So the elves of Mirkwood take a really harsh blow here. It's not a good time. But for a brief while, Mirkwood is made wholesome again. But their stroke was too late, for the Dark Lord had foreseen it, and he had long prepared all his movements. Pardon me. And the Ulairi, his 9 servants, had gone before him to make ready for his coming. Therefore his flight was but a feint, and he soon returned, and ere the wise could prevent him, he re-entered his kingdom in Mordor, and reared once again the dark towers of Barad-dûr. And in that year the White Council met for the last time, and Curanir withdrew to Isengard, and took counsel with none save himself. Orcs were mustering, and far to the east and the south the wild peoples were arming. Then, in the midst of the gathering fear and the rumor of war, the foreboding of Elrond was proved true, and the One Ring was indeed found again by a chance more strange than even Mithrandir had foreseen, and it was hidden from Curunir and from Sauron, for it had been taken from Anduin long ere they sought for it, being found by one of the small fisher folk that dwelled by the river, ere the kings failed in Gondor. And by its finder it was brought beyond search into dark hiding under the roots of the mountains. There it dwelt until even in the year of the assault upon Dol Guldur, it was found again by a wayfarer fleeing into the depths of the earth from the pursuit of orcs, and passed into a far distant country, even to the land of the Perianath, the little people, the halflings, who dwelt in the west of Eriador. And ere that day they had been held of small account by elves and by men, and neither Sauron nor any of the wise save Mithrandir had in all their councils given thought to them. By fortune and his vigilance, Mithrandir first learned of the ring, ere Sauron had news of it. Yet he was dismayed and in doubt, for too great was the evil power of this thing for any of the wise to wield, unless, like Curunir, he wished himself to become a tyrant and dark lord in his turn. But neither could it be concealed from Sauron forever, nor could it be unmade by the craft of the elves. Therefore, with the help of the Dunedain of the north, Mithrandir set a watch upon the land of the Perianath and bided his time. But Sauron had many ears, and soon he heard rumor of the One Ring, which above all things he desired, and he sent forth the Nazgul to take it. Then war was kindled, and in battle with Sauron the Third Age ended even as it had begun. So it started with war, and it ended with war, both of them being with Sauron. AKA the Third Age was just an extension of the Second Age, y'all. But with the declining of the Númenóreans and with the declining of the elves, we end up with a force that is far diminished, which means that the war with Sauron was more difficult in the Third Age than it had been during the last alliance, when the elves and Númenóreans were still at their peak. Well, not at their peak. Not the Númenóreans, at least. The elves were at their peak. But the Númenóreans had been heavily diminished because only the faithful were left at that point, but still a very strong force to be reckoned with. Whereas now, not so much. The line of kings was broken, at least for Anarion's side of the family. Isildur's family was also diminished to the point of just having a couple Dunedain here and there. So it was definitely a taller order to defeat Sauron this second time. And we do have another... Actually... Yeah, I'm not sure which version of the White Tree this is, so I do have another illustration to share. Any day. It's taking its sweet time. There we go. Alright, zoom out a tad. So here is the White Tree. I assume that this is the White Tree of Minas Ithil before it is overtaken. Now, I could be completely wrong. This might be Minas Anor or Minas Tirith. But either way, this is one of the White Trees of Gondor. It's really pretty. Taller than I expected, but very pretty. Let's see if we can see some of the details here. I can't tell if the symbols on the standards are stars or if they are suns. If they were suns, then we would know that this is Anarion. but unfortunately, we don't know for sure. All right, moving on. Let's go back to reading. Controls are being a bit slow. There we go. Sorry, guys, I don't know why my controls are being so slow. They were fine before. Who knows? Okay. So we are almost finished. We're on like the last page. But those who saw the things that were done in that time, deeds of valor and wonder, have elsewhere told the tale of the War of the Ring, and how it ended both in victory unlooked for and in sorrow long foreseen. Here let it be said that in those days the heir of Isildur arose in the north, and he took the shards of the sword of Elendil, and in Imladris they were reforged. And he went then to war, a great captain of men. He was Aragorn, son of Arathorn, the 39th heir to the right line from Isildur, and yet more like to Elendil than any before him. Battle there was in Rohan, and Curunir, the traitor, was thrown down and Isengard broken, and before the city of Gondor a great field was fought. And the lord of Morgul, captain of Sauron, there passed into darkness, and the heir of Isildur led the host of the west to the black gates of Mordor. In that last battle were Mithrandir and the sons of Elrond. Yeah, we don't really hear anything about Elladan and Elrond here, but they were with the forces at Morannon in the end. So we don't get to see them, but they were there. We don't get to see them in the Peter Jackson films, is what I mean. They were there. In that battle were Mithrandir and the sons of Elrond, and the king of Rohan, and lords of Gondor, and the heir of Isildur with the Dunedain of the north. There at the last they looked upon death and defeat, and all their valor was in vain, for Sauron was too strong. Yet in that hour was put to the proof that which Mithrandir had spoken, and help came from the hands of the weak when the wise faltered. For as many songs have since sung, it was the Periannath, the little people, dwellers in hillsides and meadows, that brought them deliverance. For Frodo, the halfling, it is said, at the bidding of Mithrandir, took on himself the burden, and alone with his servant he passed through peril and darkness, and came at last, in Sauron's despite, even to Mount Doom. And there into the fire where it was wrought, he cast the great ring of power, and so at last it was unmade and its evil consumed. They don't mention Gollum here, but we both know that Frodo faltered too, and Gollum it was who actually toppled in with the ring. Then Sauron failed, and he was utterly vanquished and passed away like a shadow of malice, and the towers of Barad-dûr crumbled into ruin, and at the rumor of their fall many lands trembled. Thus peace came again, pardon me, and a new spring opened on earth, and the heir of Isildur was crowned king of Gondor and Arnor, and the might of the Dunedain was lifted up, and their glory renewed. In the courts of Minas Anor the white tree flowered again, for a seedling was found by Mithrandir in the snows of Mindolluin, that rose tall and white above the city of Gondor. And while it still grew there, the elder days were not wholly forgotten in the hearts of the kings. Now all these things were achieved for the most part by the counsel and vigilance of Mithrandir, and in the last few days he was revealed as a lord of great reverence. And clad in white he rode into battle, but not until the time came for him to depart was it known that he had long guarded the red ring of fire, and at the first that ring had been entrusted to Círdan, the lord of the havens, but he had surrendered it to Mithrandir, for he knew whence he came, Mithrandir, and whither at last he would return.
"Now take this ring,"
he said.
"For thy labors and thy cares will be heavy, but in all it will support thee and defend thee from weariness. For this is the ring of fire, and herewith maybe thou shalt rekindle hearts to the valor of old in a world that grows chill. But as for me, my heart is with the sea, and I will dwell by the grey shores, guarding the havens until the last ship sails. Then I shall await thee."
White was that ship, and long was it a building, and long it waited. My goodness, my words. White was that ship, and long was it a building, and long it awaited the end of which Círdan had spoken. But when all these things were done, and the heir of Isildur had taken up the lordship of men, and the dominion of the west had passed to him, then it was made plain that the power of the three rings also was ended. And to the firstborn the world grew old and grey. In that time the last of the Noldor set sail from the havens and left Middle-earth forever. And latest of all the keepers of the three rings rode to the sea. And latest of all, the keepers of the three rings rode to the sea, and Master Elrond took there the ship that Círdan had made ready. In the twilight of autumn, it sailed out of Mithlond until the seas of the bent world fell away beneath it, and the winds of the round sky troubled it no more. And borne upon the high airs above the mist of the world, it passed into the ancient west, and an end was come for the Eldar of story and of song. Thus ends of the Third Age, of the Rings of Power in the Third Age, and thus ends the Silmarillion. That is it. After this, we are given tables with all of the main character names, all of the different lines of the Eldar, and also of men, the Edain. Specifically, the houses of men that were loyal to the elves in the First Age. So we're talking Beor, trying to think, Beor, Hador, and shoot. Okay, it's Beor. Hador and Haleth. That's right, Haleth. I shouldn't have forgotten Haleth. Beor, Hador, and Haleth. There's also, actually, I'll show this chart because I think this is a really good chart. This is so helpful. Okay. A little bit smaller. There we go. Okay. This is a great chart. So this is the sundering of the elves. So the elves are known as the Quendi. I've done videos on this before on TikTok, but the Eldar are just one part of the Quendi. The first sundering of the elves is the choice of whether or not to leave Cuiviénen and follow the Valar over into the other parts of the world. So that was the first sundering. The Avari are the unwilling. They're the elves who refused to go on that journey. The elves that did go on that journey, whether they made it all the way or not, are considered the Eldar. Of those, the Vanyar and the Noldor all went to Valinor, and the Teleri, some of them went to Valinor. Those are the sea elves. Then we have the Sindar and the Nandor, which stopped at different points in the journey. The Nandor stopped before the Misty Mountains, east of the Misty Mountains, and the Sindar stopped after Eredluin, so after the Blue Mountains. So they went all the way to Beleriand, but they stayed there. Those are the followers of Elwë, or Thingol. So that's where we get the elves of Doriath. They are considered the Grey Elves. So the Nandor are the ones... so from the Nandor, we have a couple different sections of elves. We have the Lyquindi, who eventually went into Eriador and eventually made their way all the way over into Beleriand. They just got there later. The king of those elves, the Lyquindi, is Denethor. So that's where we get the Denethor name that is then so familiar because of Boromir and Faramir's father. But originally that name was given to an elf, and he was the king of the Lyquindi. So here's where we get a couple other terms. So the elves who went all the way to Valinor are called the Calaquendi, the high elves, or the elves of light. So when we talk about the high elves, we're not just talking about the Vanyar. Some people make that mistake, that the Vanyar are the high elves. They're actually the fair elves. The Vanyar are just one section of the elves that went all the way to Valinor. And then we have the Noldor, and we have one sect of the Teleri. But everyone who went over and saw the two trees is considered a Calaquendi, or a light elf, because they saw the light of the two trees. Versus the Morquendi, which are the elves of darkness, and they never saw the light of the two trees. So basically everyone who dwelt in Beleriand and didn't go over the sea originally is a Morquendi. The only exception of that is Thingol, Elwë Thingol, because he was one of the original three to have been invited to Valinor before they came back and tried to get the elves to all go over there. So he's the only one who remains in Middle-earth who has actually seen the light of the two trees. So he is a Calaquendi, Teleri elf. But he is also considered the king of the Sindar because he remains in Middle-earth. So then you also have the term Umanyar, which are the elves who are not of Aman. So the descendants that came out of these people are considered the Umanyar, because they were not born in Aman. Hope that makes sense. So you have the Eldar and the Avari, and then you have the Calaquendi and the Morquendi. So not all Eldar are Calaquendi. But Morquendi would not be considered the Noldor or Vanyar at all. So it's a really... I like this table, and I've done a couple videos with this particular table in mind. It's really, really helpful. So if anyone gets confused about terms, there is a full page just of this in the Silmarillion to help you out. Okay, let me see if there's anything else. There's a note on pronunciation where it talks about how to pronounce the various names. If you ever have difficulty, definitely read through that section a couple times. If you find a word that's really hard to sound out, go to the pronunciation guide and see if that helps. Or you can listen to me, because I tend to get the pronunciation right. Not 100% of the time, but I really do try. And then we have an index of names, and that is basically the entirety. At the very end of the book, we have the appendix. And the appendix for the Silmarillion is Elements in Quenya and Sindarin Names. And so this is basically an index of terms that are used in names. And it gives you examples of all of them. So, example, Anna. Anna is gift. It's used in Anatar, and Melian and Yavanna. The same stem in Andor, land of gift. So Anna and Anda are related terms in Quenya. So Anatar, Melian, Yavanna, and Andor all have the same common root of Anna, which is gift. So just a fun look through. So if you are curious about what the names actually mean, this is a great little resource too. It just has all of the main roots Not every single one, but all of the major ones that are typically used in more than one name. If you want to look up the exact etymology of a specific name, I recommend that you go to Tolkien Gateway. Tolkien Gateway has articles on practically everything ever mentioned in Tolkien's works. So typically, if you look up a name of a character or a place on Tolkien Gateway, there will be a section called etymology, and that's going to tell you the roots of the words that Tolkien used to name these characters. So I find that very, very helpful. And that's pretty much how I did the first couple sessions of the Silmarillion vocabulary that I did before I was just like, this is taking too long. I may go back and read through things, skim through things again, and make vocabulary lists, and make them into separate videos, explaining the Elvish roots for each of the vocabulary words. So that might be sort of a companion guide, if you will, a pronunciation and etymological companion guide for the Silmarillion. So I may take the time and do that. Maybe that's what I'll do to replace... Well, actually, no, I won't do that to replace Silmarillion Saturday. I like reading too much, and just chatting vocabulary is super freaking boring, so I might just film that, not live stream it, but film it, just me chattering about it, and I'll just post it up as a guide. But that is it. We've seen all the beautiful illustrations. It is a fantastic version of the Silmarillion. I happen to get a first printing version of this book, which is super cool. I usually don't manage to get first editions. So even though this is a very new version of the Silm, I have a first printing version, which is pretty cool. Okay. Just trying to get the bookmark to lie flat so that it doesn't bend the pages. I'm like, work with me. Oh my goodness, it's being so problematic. There we go. Okay. Cool. So I'm just gonna slip this back into its cover and show off the illustration on the cover again. But remember, it does come with maps. There is one standalone map here, and then there is that other map that we used during Chapter 14. I believe it's part 10 of these live streams. But Chapter 14 was of the Realms of Beleriand. So that one had a lot of place names, and in that section of the book there is a second map that shows the basic regions of Beleriand, and in red are listed the Noldor lords that rule those areas. So, just a last look at these beautiful, beautiful illustrations. So this is the burning of the ships of the Teleri at Loskar. Beautiful cover. So it's a beautiful edition. Some people hate that it's bright orange, but obviously I don't mind. I don't mind at all. So that was the Silmarillion, everybody. We made it! We did it! We did it! Woo! Umanyar was introduced as a term because the Sindar found Morquendi offensive. Oh, that's in the home. Super cool. Thank you for sharing that. Let's see, that's book 11, so that's not Peoples of Middle-earth, that's book 12. War of the Jewels? War of the Jewels. I'm pretty sure that's War of the Jewels. I am not surprised by that at all. That they're called the Umanyar instead, because Morquendi sounds offensive. The Elves of the Dark. Ew. They're like, no, we're still elves. We're still star people. Because the Umanyar are specifically the elves that, they did undertake the Great Journey, but they didn't go all the way to Valinor, so they didn't see the two trees, but they did take the journey. They're still considered the Eldar. And so they'd be like, excuse me, we're not Morquendi, those are the Avari. Like, the Avari are Morquendi, y'all are rude. So I totally believe that. And I don't know if you guys have heard my phone blowing the frick up, but I need to double check my texts. So I'm going to call this stream to an end because someone's been blowing up my phone and I worry that something's wrong. But thank you guys for joining me for all of these live streams. If you have stuck with this from the beginning, bless your heart. I will eventually go through and edit these down into something that doesn't meander quite so much, that has some of the talking points but doesn't go quite as in-depth, and certainly doesn't contain all of my weird tangential stuff that I talk about. So I hope you guys have enjoyed all of these. I will continue to read Tolkien's works, providing as much commentary as possible, because due to legal reasons, I cannot simply read the books without putting my own interpretation or spin on them. I can't record them like an audiobook. That is illegal. That is abuse of copyright. So, I will not be doing that, but I will try to read things in a new entertainment format. That's why I will be doing the Lay of Lathian as part of my ASMR streams, because it will be whispered or softly spoken, along with some Elvish and crafts and fun stuff like that. So hopefully you guys will join me for some of those streams and have fun with it, and I'll figure out which book we might tackle next. I'm thinking The Children of Húrin, just because I really like it, and it reads a little bit easier than the proper Silmarillion, but yeah, that may be The Fall of Gondolin as well. I think both of those would be really fun to read on stream. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you, Amanmor. I appreciate you guys. So, everybody please take care. I'm going to check my phone and make sure nothing's wrong. But I will see you guys next week. I'll figure out which book we're going to tackle. Or at the very least, I will do an ASMR stream. One of the two. But I like to do one stream on Saturdays, so I will have that done. I'm also working on a new format to put things in place so that I can do my crafting streams, because I have several things I'm working on now. I need to paint all of the leaves that are going on the 2 tree decals that are in my living room. So I have a lot of leaves to paint gold and silver. So that I might do on stream, and then I also have all my cross-stitching that I'd like to do on stream. That will also be quasi ASMR, because I plan to have a mic set up to pick up the noise of me doing the needlework, because I find that really soothing, so hopefully other people do too. But I love you guys. Everybody please take care. I will see you guys next time. You like the Lost Tales the most? Yeah, definitely. I think I want to do the standalone books rather than reading from the Book of Lost Tales itself, because there are so many different drafts of the same story. I would have to choose which one, or talk about notes, and it gets really complex. So I think I might use the standalone books, but I do like the Lost Tales. I do like the Fall of Gondolin, the Children of Húrin in greater detail, and also Beren and Luthien. It's not my favorite story of the 3, but there's so much more detail that I can't not cover them. So we'll probably tackle those and have some more fun. But everybody please take care. I will see you guys next time. I love you guys. Thanks for sticking with me. We'll do more later. Bye everybody.